Hi and welcome. This is Book Club Conversation Series 9 as we continue on coming together around books that inspire, books that motivate, books that prompt us to be our best self every day, to engage and embrace success daily. And in this series, we're talking about effective communication. As a matter of fact, the name of the book that we are reading is 21 Days of Effective Communication. And I have some great, wonderful, splendiferous people with me in studio this evening. So let me pause and give them a chance to introduce themselves, ladies.
Hi, my name is Colleen Lynch and I'm a corporate secretary.
Hi, good night. I am Chanel Richards, proud mommy of four boys, and I am a administrative assistant.
And we seem to be having some audio challenges in the corner, but in with us, and hopefully we'll get her back on, is Renma Berkeley, Administrative Coordinator. So we have a bunch of administrative people in the building with us in the virtual building, administrative people for whom effective communication is key. And I'm reminding you that we're looking at the book 21 Days of Effective Communication, Everyday Habits and Exercises to improve your communication skills and social intelligence. It's written by Ian Tuhovsky, published by Positive Psychology Coaching Series. And we're getting into what? Chapter 2, Day 2, Chapter 2, where we're talking about counting the number of times you interrupt people. OMG. When I read the chapter, ladies, that was an OMG moment for me. Even as I read, and they said, by your interruption, you are insinuating that your thoughts and ideas are more important than that of the person that you're talking to. When you all read this line, please tell me what came to your mind. What stood out to you?
Well, for me, this chapter really spoke to me, as you said, because I tend to interrupt persons when they speak as well, but I don't necessarily agree that my point is more important. Sometimes, the conversation is so excited that you can't wait to put in your 2 cents in the conversation. So uh, I guess it's twofold, but from my perspective, I interrupt or I tend to interrupt because I can't wait to say or give my opinion on the conversation.
Mm. Chanel, what are your thoughts?
Well, for most people who knows me, I am the excited interrupter. I enjoy interrupting conversations, and it is something that prior to this book I have been working on because I have seen the effect it have on others. So this is was reading this chapter was a reminder to me to be a little more vigilant in what I'm doing and how it can impact others. So take it down a little bit, listen more, and then comment.
Hi guys, you hearing me?
We are hearing you.
I
Hi. Yes, for me, when I read that verse, I'm sorry, that sentence, it struck me as in, is this how I make people feel when I interrupt? Whether it's from excitement or you want to get your point across before you forget, I wonder, do I make them feel like they are less than? Or do I make them think that I think I am more than? So it really made me pull back and, start to pay attention to different communications, different conversation I've had, especially with people I'm close to. And, I'm wondering, do I make them feel in a negative way? So that really struck me.
Well, I'll tell you what, I agree with the notion of excitement and sometimes being so um excited to share your thoughts. But you know what? The author in this book really causes us as in everybody reading the book, to really pull back and ask, as much as I'm excited, if I really, really thought what the other person was about to say is super important, would I wait or would I cut them off? And so it causes everyone reading to then pull back and sort of have that sort of analysis. I am excited, but how important think about it this way. Let's imagine we had to go collect $1 million. Someone, whatever fortunate circumstance happened, and you have to go down the road tomorrow for 8, wherever down the road is, yeah, tomorrow for 8 to collect this $1 million. That's something to be excited about, right? But in the excitement, would you bathe or would you not bathe before leaving to go down the road to get this $1 million? Would you just jump off your bed and say, I'm so excited to get it, that I'm not even going to bother to bathe and brush my teeth. I'm just going straight away to the building to go collect this money? Or is it that the process is so important that we would give space to do whatever is needed, and we would hold back on that excitement? We wouldn't let ourselves be overcome with excitement. And while I know it's a real far out there example, it makes me wonder, when it comes to excitement, is there a space to be restrained even with excitement? Because possibly by allowing a person to finish, it's not about us and how excited we are and the 10,000 things we have racing through our minds that we want to be able to say, but really it's allowing the other person the opportunity to share, to have their point, and to feel honored. Because later on the author talks that shares that some people feel disrespected when they're interrupted. But I want to ask, even as we think about the notion of restraint, not because our points are not valid, but because we want to give the other person the opportunity to fully express themselves, do you think that it's worth interrupting once you're excited? Or is it that it's worth being restrained even though you are excited? What are your thoughts on this?
For me, I think it's worth being restrained, because the author does says that interrupting can completely kill your chance of developing a good relationship with someone else. And sometimes we interrupt, and it's not that we have bad intentions, but does the other person see it like that? So I think, as you stated, it's good sometimes to restrain yourself, not sometimes, most of the times, and give the person that freedom, that ability to express themselves, and then we can comment on it.
Interesting.
For me, it will definitely be to restrain, because sometimes in the process of trying to overtalk or give your point of view, you miss out a lot of information, or you shut down somebody from trying to share exactly what they want to share. They send them off course on what they wanted to see. So if I restrain myself, I get the information needed in communication. I give somebody a chance to allow to vent, to open up, to say what is necessary at that point in time.
I agree with both of you all. You need, in situations like being excited, we do need to restrain ourselves sometimes, because as Rena was saying, sometimes you might be so excited, but you also need to consider the other people within the conversation and how they might feel, or how your emotions might affect them or interrupt them in what they're trying to say. So restraining yourself is always the better way to go.
Yeah, so interesting, huh? Because I know that outside of the book, it's so easy to for people to convince themselves, well, I'm excited, so it's okay. It's not a problem. There's nothing negative about it. But certainly the writings of the author here shows us a different perspective. And the author, Ian, he goes on to talk about strategies or recommendations for challenging yourselves not to interrupt. And he talks about setting targets, sticking up signs, writing down the points that you want to make in advance, remembering that your silence is as influential as your voice, and just practice biting your tongue. Now, I want to ask, even as we wind down on the notion of being intentional about listening and not interrupting, I want to ask, what practical tip do you use, or having read the chapter, do you intend to use to help yourself not to interrupt? And I'll give you an example, something I'm very conscious of, and I'm intentional about reminding myself is I do a count to three. That's what I do. So because in times past when I would have interrupted, it's not because I'm necessarily so excited or that I think my point is more important, but not everyone is consistent in their cues, whether verbal, non-verbal cues, to indicate when they're finished. And so sometimes I would genuinely think a person is finished making their point, and I would jump right in when maybe they're not done. Maybe they just need a pause to realize they have something else they want to add. So one of the things that I do to challenge myself, because I'm one of those. I used to be what Chanel called the excited interrupter. I was definitely that person. But what I would do is I count to three, and which means that I give about 3 seconds after someone has finished speaking. I would not say anything, and then I would speak. So that way, it gives a person a time to definitely, hopefully, be done, have a quick second to think if they want to add anything before they start speaking again. So by the time it's my turn to make a contribution, I'm not interrupting, but rather I've given them a chance. So I want to get your views on that. What points do you or recommendation that you use or you think you want to move on to use as you continue now to challenge yourself with a new perspective about listening skills as part of effective communication and not interrupting as part of effective communication?
I know that we all like to be heard and listened to. So one of the things I will do, like if I'm having a friendly conversation, with somebody, a friend of mine, I will say, what type of conversation are we going to have? Is it one that you need to vent or let something out? And or is it a discussion that we're going to take place? And oftentimes when they say, the day was hard and they have a lot to say, I say, you speak, I'm listening, share your thoughts. And afterwards, if you want my advice, feel free, I will give it to you. So it's a moment I give somebody a chance to be heard, feel, to validate their feelings, and then I can comment on it. Counting is an excellent step into causing this, checking yourself when you are discussing or talking or having that interaction with somebody, because as I say, everybody likes to be heard, and I don't want to miss an important point. In relationships, it tends to cause a lot of havoc when it is one person is not feeling heard over the other person, or they don't get a chance to share what they had to say and give the information necessary. So you tend to do something differently from what it was asked of you. So I will definitely use counting in the future but maintain the step of allowing people to channel the type of conversation we have so we can know how to bridge the gap between the interruptions.
For me, I do two things. If I realize like this person have a desire to vent, that's what they need. Sometimes I just inhale and I hold it for like 2 seconds and I exhale. So that allows me to be sure that they've finished expressing themselves. And another thing I do is, but I don't. I know the author talked about biting your tongue. I don't bite my tongue, but what I do is I kind of suck the inside of one of my cheeks, and that kind of holds me back from jumping the gun and giving my response or giving my opinion. So those are two things that I utilize.
For me, I tend to listen. I try to listen more than me wanting to speak. Although I want to speak, I would tend to, as Renna said, she would use her cheek, but I would tend to bite my teeth so that I wouldn't come out to say anything, but I would try to focus more on listening to what the person has to say, and then try to wait to see if the person is finished before I say anything, before I interrupt. So all points are valid. I guess it's a matter of putting, everyone has their own way of dealing with things. So even a combination of what everyone said would be helpful in dealing with conversations and trying not to interrupt at any point in time.
That's a really valid point, and I think definitely one of the things we've all really brought out and agreed on is the idea that indeed interrupting is not necessarily the best way to handle a conversation. But Renma brought up a really great point that I want to leave open for your input, and Renma put forward the idea that says, does interrupting in a negative conversation or argument have validation? So the author is saying, "Oh, you shouldn't interrupt; it's disrespectful," all of that. But the question then, and the book didn't touch on this, but certainly it's great for discussion. Does interrupting when a conversation is negative, when an argument is happening, have validation? What are your thoughts?
Well, for me, I think it depends on the conversation, or I guess the level of the argument. Because if it's something you're discussing, sports or politics, something kind of like that, then I guess interrupting in that friendly banter kind of way is fine. But when it comes to where you have to deal with a disgruntled client or someone in a store who's expressing their dislike, or situations like that, um then you need to find ways, I guess, to de-escalate the situation. So sometimes you do have to interrupt just simply to say, excuse me, sir, if you could just listen, this is what our policy is, this is what our protocol is, or would you like to speak to management, or could you step to the side? So I guess it depends on the level that it is. Interrupting, I think, have some validation in those situations.
For me, I'm really open-minded that even in a quote unquote negative conversation, for me, I lean towards the idea that interrupting can still be received as disrespectful. And if a person is, you see, there's so many contexts, yeah. But I really think if there's a negative conversation, somebody's telling you about an issue that they have, I question whether interrupting and stopping them from telling you about the issue is the best way to understand the issue. Because how do you understand the issue if if the person doesn't have the opportunity to tell? And I think there's a difference between that and if it is you're talking about maybe a group of people, maybe gossiping or that sort of negative conversation, then the question is, do you even want to be a part of that conversation or not? So there's so many levels to it. But I question whether if there's a negative situation, whether in the workplace or otherwise, interrupting um, really would stand as an effective tool to understand the problem than to make the appropriate referral. Because if we have to refer to management or refer to policy, how do we effectively make that referral if the person hasn't had the opportunity to clarify and fully explain, even though it may feel or be experienced as negative? But of course, I'm open to the other ladies if you have anything else to share.
I honestly think that sometimes silence in these situations is at best, because sometimes when there is an argument, to avoid it escalating, even if it's in terms of a friendly political conversation, or if it's about sports or anything like that, it can lead to negativity really quickly. And it's going to stop, all jokes aside, because people points of views is something that they need to adjust to, and not everybody likes to adapt to somebody else's idea or concept. So sometimes, to diffuse a situation, the silence is always best, and especially in those group conversations, or even stepping back and away from it. But where it comes to, like, if you're looking at job or work-wise situation, sometimes allowing somebody to speak and giving their thoughts and ideas, even if they are upset, and remaining silent also gives them the opportunity to share properly, and then they will kind of calm down in the process of your silence, and then you get the opportunity to relate to them, you know, how best the situation can be handled.
I fully agree with you all, but I am thinking from another perspective in terms of a negative argument. If you, as a person listening to the other who's arguing, if you have some information that may quell the argument, I think it's valid to interrupt. In terms of providing that information that may give the person answers to what they were arguing about. So again, it depends on the situation that you are in. If you think that the information you have or you interrupting would help to quell the situation, I think it's valid to interrupt. Otherwise, be quiet, be silent, and let the person vent. If you know the person is going, if you know what you have to say is going to escalate the situation, then it's best to leave it alone and stay silent.
I think this is one of those touch points where the per case basis for handling it does matter. Because while I can agree, listen, very often I'm in conversations where within the first 30 seconds I already know what is the solution. I already know what the person is going to say. I know what's the solution and I know how to shut it down in terms of whatever the challenge is. I already have everything worked out in my mind, but that I'll still sit for 5 minutes just listening to them go through. Because part of in the communication experience, I'm talking from a work perspective here, is that sometimes a person needs to be given the opportunity to unpack. Whether I receive it as positive, negative, or otherwise. The person needs the opportunity to unpack and figure out their thoughts and feelings about it. And even though, because what they're talking to me about is my specialization, so I already know what they're going to say, I still have to give them the opportunity to figure out what they want to say. My experience in that space or with that issue doesn't change the fact that for that client, they're not figuring it out. And as part of honoring their process, I should give them the opportunity to figure it out. Because sometimes, and it happens so much, even sometimes, I mean, I know all of you ladies, and sometimes I'll be talking to you and I would say, oh my God, it's only now that I'm speaking out about it. I realize XYZ is the case. And it happens with other people when they're dealing with us as well. And so I get what you're saying, Colleen, and you're right. If we interrupt, we could give the solution so much faster. But I think one of the things that seems to be popping up within this conversation about listening, interrupting, and whether it's valid to interrupt is the perspective that says, are we interrupting for our own benefit or for the benefit of the other person? Because is it only about the solution, or is it about recognizing that maybe that person needs to have that experience explain, or they need to feel honored by being allowed to share their thoughts, or they need to be given the room to ventilate and unpack their thoughts and feelings so they could better understand whatever they're describing. And so I really think the perspective that we take when looking into the situation really impacts the decisions we make about whether or not we should interrupt and whether or not there's an appropriate time to interrupt as a tool for effective communication. But even as we wind down this particular edition, I want to leave the floor open for any closing thoughts and anything that you think you might be doing different, having read through the chapter 2.
I think all this is a matter of putting it into practice. I mean, communication is an everyday part of life. Whether you're communicating with your family at home or communicating in the office, in the workplace, even commuting every day to and from work, you would interact with persons. So I guess it's a matter of taking all these points that we have read in these chapters and try to apply it to the situation that we are faced with at the time.
For me, one of the things the chapter says is, to exercise caution when offering your own opinion. So even while whether I jump in unexpected or I wait for the other person to share their opinion, I still need to be cautious when I'm offering my own thoughts and opinion. So that's something I'm definitely going to be putting in practice.
For me, it's definitely not to be too excited to share my thoughts and ideas, but to listen and to give others a chance to speak and let what they have to say be heard and then interrupt. So that is my takeaway. And practicing the different steps, counting, biting my tongue sometimes, because in every situation there is a moment where you really want to express that thought because you may not agree. In those instances, bite your tongue a little bit and hold back. And then, think of a positive way in which you can share your thoughts and ideas without hurting or damaging anybody in the process.
Yeah, most definitely. They're all really valid points. And as Colleen would have shared, it affects our workplace experiences as well as our personal experiences. So certainly working through these points towards encouraging effective communication definitely can be applied to all in all circumstances. Ladies, thank you so much as always for joining in for yet another insightful conversation. Until next Saturday, keep on communicating and communicate effectively. Have a good evening, everyone.